fire. Before there was an earth to stand on, before the gods carved out the heavens, before the first man and woman drew breath, there was a giant, and the world beneath your feet was built from his murdered body. The Norse called his kind the Jotnar. They were not monsters who crept in at the edges of a finished world. They were the first beings in all creation, older than the ways, older than mankind, older than the ground itself, frost and fire and storm given flesh. The gods would rise up to slay them, drown them in a flood, and raise the world from a giant's bones. And still the Jotnar were never truly destroyed. They waited at the frozen edge of nothing, biding their time for the day the chains would snap and the Jotnar would come back to burn it all down. This is the story of the giants the North could never forget. In the beginning, the Norse said, there was no earth, no sky, no sea, only a vast and silent emptiness they called Ginnungagap, the yawning void. Picture standing at the center of absolute nothing. To the north stretches a frozen world of ice and killing mist. To the south roars a land of raging fire. And in the narrow gap between them, where the breath of the fire drifts across the edge of the ice, the frost begins to melt. One drop at a time, from those first dripping waters, something stirs. Not a god, not a man, a giant. His name was Ymir, the eldest thing in existence, the father of the frost giants. Before there was a single place to stand, before light, before time, there was Ymir, alone in the cold, and Ymir did not wait to be given a world. As he slept in the frost, life poured out of his own body. From the sweat beneath his arms came a man and a woman, fully formed. From his legs, giant fathered giant. A great primeval cow had emerged from the same melting ice, and her 4 rivers of milk fed him as he grew. This was the first race of the Jotnar, born not from love, not from union, not from any god's design, but from the living body of the first giant himself, multiplying in the dark while the universe was still unmade. They were enormous, they were ancient, they were here first, but the ice was still giving up its secrets. As the great cow licked the salt from the frozen blocks, she freed something buried within. First a head of hair, then a face, then a whole living being. This was Buri, the first of the gods. His grandsons were 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, the first true gods of the Norse. And their grandmother was a giant's daughter, for in the first age, gods and giantess were not yet enemies. They were family. The giants had ruled creation alone. Now the gods had arrived, and the universe was about to become a battlefield. For Odin and his brothers looked out at Ymir and the endless multiplying of his frostborn children, and they saw a cosmos that could never be born while the first giant lived. So the 3 young gods did the unthinkable. They turned on the oldest being in all creation. Imagine the youngest things alive raising their hands against the eldest, the source of their own bloodline. This was not a battle between armies. It was not a clash of equals. It was the murder of the first being by his own descendants. They struck Ymir down where he lay. And when the first giant fell, what poured out of him became one of the most haunting images in all of Norse myth, and one of the most familiar in the entire ancient world. Ymir's blood did not trickle. It erupted, a torrent so vast it became a flood, a single deluge powerful enough to drown the whole world. Picture an ocean appearing out of nowhere, swallowing the frozen plains, climbing over everything that lived. The frost giants, the whole ancient race born of Ymir's body, were swept under and destroyed. All but 2, a giant named Birth of Ymir and his wife, climbed into a hollowed vessel, a great wooden ark, and rode out the drowning of the world, floating alone until the waters fell. And from that single surviving pair, the Norse said, the whole line of giants began again. A world-ending flood, an entire race destroyed, a lone man and woman who survived in a wooden vessel to carry the bloodline into the world that followed. If that pattern sounds familiar, hold on to it, because we have heard it before, and before this is over, we will hear it again. With Ymir dead and his children drowned, the gods built the world from the body of the giant they had killed. They tore his flesh into soil and made the earth. They poured his blood into the hollows and made the seas. They raised his bones into mountains and his shattered teeth into stone. They lifted his enormous skull and made it the dome of the sky, setting a dwarf at each of its four corners to hold it aloft, and flung his brains across the heavens to make the clouds. Look up at the sky, the Norse were saying, and you are looking at the inside of a dead giant's skull. The ground was not raised out of nothing. It was made from a corpse. The earth itself was a giant's grave. And from Ymir's own eyebrows, the gods built a wall in a ring around the realm of men and named that protected land Midgard. The wall had one purpose, to keep the giants out. For the survivors, the children of Birth of Ymir, had multiplied again at the cold edge of creation, in a wild realm called Jotunheim, beyond the last rivers in the dark forests where they brooded over a world built from the bones of their ancestor. From that day, the gods of Asgard and the giants of Jotunheim were locked in a war without end, one the Norse believed had burned since the first morning of creation and would burn until its final night. But the Jotnar were never only monsters at the gate, they were threaded through the gods themselves. Loki, the trickster who walked freely through Asgard, was giant-born, and with a giantess, he fathered three of the most terrible beings in the nine worlds: Fenrir, the wolf fated to swallow Odin; Jormungandr, the serpent grown so vast it coiled around the whole earth; and Hel, the queen of the dead. And far to the south, in a burning country of fire, the mightiest of them all sat waiting. Surtr, a flaming sword in his hand, brighter than the sun, biding his time for the end of everything. Because the Norse did not believe the war would go on forever. They believed it would end in a single world-ending day. And on that day, the giants would win. They called it Ragnarok, the doom of the gods. Imagine the moment the chains finally break. The great wolf runs free, its jaws stretching from earth to sky. The world serpent heaves up out of the sea. And from the south, Surtr leads the armies of fire to fall upon the shining world of the ones. Gods and giants die in each other's arms. And then Surtr flings his fire across all creation until the world itself sinks, burning beneath the waves. The first beings became the last, returned to unmake everything the gods had built upon their ancestors' bones. And yet, even then, the story does not end in nothing. The Norse believed that after the fire and the flood, a new green earth would rise again from the sea, and a remnant of survivors would climb up into the dawn to begin the world anew. The giants are no more gone at the end of the world than they were at its beginning. The pattern only turns again: a flood, a burning, a remnant, a new world. The Jotnar are never destroyed. They are only waiting beyond the wall for the day the old powers rise once more. Now step back and look at what the Norse remembered. A race of giants who came before the gods and before mankind. An age when those giants ruled creation alone. A younger generation of gods who rose up and overthrew them. And a great flood that drowned almost the entire race, leaving a handful of survivors to ride out the deluge in a wooden vessel and carry the bloodline forward. Strip away the frost in the northern names, and it is the same story the Greeks told of the Titans, the same memory the people of the two rivers preserved of the Anunnaki, the very same shape as the Nephilim in the Watchers of Scripture. Peoples who never met, divided by frozen oceans in burning deserts, all telling the same story of the same drowned giants. Ask yourself how that happens. How strangers who never shared a language or a coastline remember the same vanished race, the same flood, the same lone survivors in a wooden boat. Maybe each of them simply invented it. Or maybe beneath the frost and the fire and the foreign names, they were all remembering something real, a story so old it surfaced in every corner of the ancient world, no matter how far its peoples drifted. You are hearing that story now, pieced back together because the memory was never truly lost. It was only scattered. But it doesn't end here. We have heard the giants of the Greeks and the Norse. But the oldest memory of all lies further south and further back, in the very first cities mankind ever built, between two great rivers, where the giants were called the Anunnaki and came down from the heavens themselves. Subscribe to History Remembered, and next we travel to the dawn of civilization, because the deeper you dig into the ancient world, the clearer it becomes. The old powers never truly vanished. They were only forgotten.